Welcome to Satsang. So beautiful to be together. Is suffering a necessary part of the human condition? Depends how you define necessary. It's certainly a core component of the package deal of human life. In the Buddhist tradition, one of the core foundational truths is life is suffering. But I wouldn't say necessary, and the reason is that it's a core part of the human condition as long as we are identified by our stories, by our bodies, by our histories, by our personalities. And so if we went around, and I won't, it would take too long, but if we did, and I said, tell me why you suffer, because obviously we all have some kind of suffering. I said, tell me why you suffer. Even though we would have different reasons, every one of them would be based in some way on this identification we have with the body, with its story, with its history. So whether it's something like, I suffer because I was harmed in this way by another being. I was betrayed, I was cheated, I was abused by another being, and therefore I continue to suffer that pain, that trauma. Or whether it's I suffer jealousy, envy, competition because I feel like I'm not quite enough, and wherever I look I see people who are more beautiful than I am, smarter than I am, more successful than I am, more popular than I am, more spiritual than I am, sort of whatever scale I'm using to judge myself. I look around and I see people who are so much better on that scale than I am. And so I want to be where they are, I want to have what they have, and so I suffer. Or maybe it's something interpersonally. I suffer because there is this person in my life who treats me in a certain way, who speaks to me in a certain way, or who is making their own life choices in a certain way. And it's making me suffer. So we'd have a lot of different examples, but they're all based on some sense where I've identified as the history of this body, where it's been, what's happened to it, what's been done to it, what it's experienced. Or I identify by how much it has, how much it can do, how successful it is. Or I identify it based on its relationships. as long as we live like that, suffering is a non-negotiable component of life. The way out of suffering is to disengage, to unhook my inner state, my inner emotional, mental, psychological state from identification with the physical body, with the story. So it is something that is transcendable, which is why spiritual practice, meditation, prayer, service, seva, yoga, sacrifice, all of the things that we do, the study of scriptures to get gyan, wisdom, devotional practices. All of these practices are there to help us out of this false identification. But I would give you an additional point as well. Because everything I've given you so far is pretty much core Buddhism 101 or Hinduism 101. Like this is kind of the foundation of what we're taught. I'd give you another part on a personal level, which is even though the ultimate goal, the ultimate purpose, the ultimate point is to realize that we're not the body, that we are the soul, the spirit, to identify as that instead of as this body and story, to disengage from the history, the personality, all of that, and therefore we'd become free of suffering. It doesn't come by disconnecting yourself from life. And one of the mistakes that a lot of us make on the path is we think that the way to have that experience is to slowly kind of disconnect ourselves. And so what we end up doing is we end up pushing away human life. We end up pushing away love because, oh my God, it's going to lead to suffering. Like, if I love you so much and then you make a choice that I don't agree with, or you're not nice to me, or you do something that hurts me, or God forbid you get sick or die, I'm going to really suffer. And so in my aim not to suffer, in my aim to not identify as body, as relationship, we push away human life. And I don't think that's the goal. I don't think that's the way, and I don't think it's the goal. So neither the journey nor the destination. The moksha, the liberation, the enlightenment, the freedom that we speak about isn't there because we've pushed away human life. It's there because we've realized something so much more. So it's not that we've stopped becoming human. It's that we've realized that we are not just this, we are so much more. And so if you think, for example, about my favorite example of this, most of us identify as this glass. Let's say this glass is myself. Now the glass is filled with water. Rocks come and they fall in the glass. We're going to call those rocks the trials and tribulations of a human life. All the times that people don't treat us the way we want them to. All the times that life just doesn't go the way that if we had a magic wand, we would have made it go. Now, what most of us try to do is we try to push those rocks away. push away the hurt, prevent those situations, try to make the world act the way we want it to. Because otherwise, when the rocks fall in the glass, what happens, right? It splashes all over the place. It's a complete mess. We lose ourselves. But if you take those same rocks and you drop them in the ocean, what happens? Yeah, you don't get nearly, barely a ripple. Certainly not a splash that causes all the water to overflow the embankments. It doesn't cause high tide. Nothing happens. And so that enlightenment, that freedom, that samadhi, that whatever word we use, it comes not because I've pushed away human life in order to be free of suffering. It comes because I've realized I'm the ocean, not a glass. I haven't pushed away my glassness. I haven't pushed away the rocks. I've simply embraced my oceanness. I've realized that I am so much more than I've ever identified as. And so these rocks can be there. I can even feel them. I don't have to push them away. But it also doesn't have to drown me or cause all of me to come out all over the edges. Like I don't have to lose myself. And for me, on a personal level, I've noticed there's a lot more suffering the more I try to push away human life. When you embrace human life, yeah, there's always a bit of suffering. You love, you lose. You care about something, it doesn't happen the way you want it to. And it can be something personal, or it can be an earthquake in Turkey and Syria, right? It can be anything. But when we love, we suffer. Because we've allowed ourselves to love. But what I've discovered personally is I suffer so much more when I push away that humanity than when I actually embrace it, even with those moments of the suffering, because the suffering it's a mirror. And it allows you to look into it, and it allows you to look into it and say, okay, there is suffering. And then we say, all right, what caused it? Most of the time, it's just our ego. Most of the time, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe that person spoke to me in this way. And then you get to look at yourself, and you get to kind of chuckle with love at the humanity of yourself. And say, all right, there we go, welcome to the fact that you're still human, right? And you get to kind of just, sort of soothe the ego a bit. You don't take it too seriously. You acknowledge it. All right, that's what it was. Or you look at it and you say, that's suffering because I have a human heart that broke. And I let myself care and love, not only soul to soul, which is the core of love, but I also let myself love individual being to individual being. And I was hurt. And then you get to analyze and you get to decide, well, was it worth it? And in most of the cases, yeah. It was worth it. But you get to make a conscious decision. I'm going to consciously decide to realize I am soul, to love from a place of soul, because it's so much bigger and fuller than a place of just one human psyche loving another human psyche. But we also allow ourselves to love from the place of humans. And whether it's human loving human, whether it's human loving tree, human loving river, it's beautiful. And it's beautiful to have that experience, even if it means you suffer when the tree gets cut down, or you suffer when the river is polluted or dries up, or you suffer when something happens to the loved one. But I've found on a personal level that every time I would again choose to have that human experience of love, even if it's going to give me a human experience of suffering. But it's a choice we get to make, and it's certainly not the same choice that everybody makes. There's no right or wrong. I happen to, in addition to loving the soul, I happen to also love the human existence. I think it's a really great gift. And so suffering is part of that package deal. But what happens with spiritual practice is it becomes more conscious. So instead of being a victim of it and having no control over it and letting it overwhelm you, you get to just look at it as part of the human condition. And whether it's suffering because of the ego, and you smile and then you go on about your life. You don't allow yourself to wallow in it. Or whether it's suffering because of a false identification. You've identified too much, incorrectly, without wisdom, as your physical body, or as a particular job you have, or as a particular skill you have, or as a particular rung on a social ladder you have, and it ends up not being where you want it to be. So you suffer, and you look at it and you realize, that was a not so wise decision I made to identify so deeply with that. We see it all the time. We identify as our careers, and then we have to retire, and then not only are you without a career, but you're without a sense of self. Or we identify only as our relationships, and then kids move out, they grow up, they move out. There's a divorce, or there's a death. And then not only are you without the loved one, but you're also without the identity, without the sense of self. And then you look at it and you realize, okay. So I lost myself somewhere there along the way. I forgot who I really was in that. And it's an opportunity for learning. It's an opportunity for growth. It's that mirror that we get to look in. And sometimes it's just that beautiful experience of knowing that you are suffering because you love. And it's a willing, open-hearted, open-armed acceptance of this opportunity we've been given to love with a human heart, knowing that suffering's part of the package deal. So, is it necessary? No, but it's going to be part of most of our lives. And what I would say is, see if you can shift from suffering in the mind, which is the ego nonsense that doesn't serve you at all and just hurts you. see if you can let go of that. Free yourself of that through the introspection, through the gyan, through the remembrance that you are not the body, the career, the bank account, all of that through this really refined spiritual practice. But that suffering in the heart that's there because we love, well, that's up to you. On a personal level, I allow it to be there. Because to me, it's worth it. It's worth the opportunity to love as a human that I know is going to include the suffering as a human. Because that love as a human is beautiful. But see if you can develop the refined discrimination of understanding what is suffering of the mind compared to what is suffering in the heart. What is suffering due to ignorance and ego compared to what is suffering due to the fact that I've allowed myself to really love and would continue to allow myself to really love. And then open yourself up to that. But at the same time, keep reminding yourself over and over again that ultimately at the core, we are soul. And ultimately at the core, none of the suffering is necessary. As we move fully and truly into that ultimate awareness of who we are. But along the way, I don't know, I think being a human is pretty beautiful. And yet, it includes some suffering. But I think it's worth it. Other questions? Yes. Sure. Yes, we were going to start with you. Yes, you were. I remember.
I came here from UK with my husband's ashes, who passed away recently. I'm trying to overcome. You have answered most of my questions in the suffering, but I'm intrigued by that permanent smile on your face. And to be honest with you, I'm just wondering what brings that smile? What is the secret? I know you have done all your spiritual sadhana and everything, which helps you a lot. But the permanent smile is something which is very confusing for a human person. And I'm meeting you for the first time. So if you can just enlighten us a little bit more on that.
Did everyone hear her question? Okay. It's sweet because it reminds me actually of my grandmother. Because when I first came to India, I had been here just a few months. And I went back to LA and I went to visit my grandmother. And I spent, I don't know, an hour, maybe 2 hours with her. And when I left, I spoke to my uncle on the way going back to my parents' house for my grandmother. And he and I have always been very close. And he was laughing. And I said, what happened? And in the interim, since I had left seeing my grandmother and speaking to him, he had spoken to her. And obviously the whole family was very concerned, like, what's happened? My God, she's left America. 1 minute she was in the midst of getting a PhD, and the next minute now she's wanting to live in an ashram in Rishikesh. And, she who was never religious now suddenly wants to just live in this ashram. And so the whole family was very concerned. So my uncle had asked my grandma, how is she? Because I had gone to see my grandma first, straight from the airport. And evidently my grandma had said, well, she looks okay. And of course that just made my uncle more concerned because you know that there's another shoe that's going to drop. And he said, well, but what do you mean she looks okay? And my grandma repeated, well, she looks okay, but, and my uncle was like, but what? And my grandma finally said, well, but she's just happy all the time. And it's so funny, and yet it's also kind of sad, because if I had spent the hour or two with my grandma constantly checking my watch and saying, God, Grandma, I really got to go. I'm about to hit rush hour, and I got to get home, and I've got all these things to do, and I just got off the plane, and oh my God this, or oh my God that, she would have said, yeah, she's great. Perfect. But that being happy all the time, and as you 25 plus years later say, what's the secret? I don't think it's one thing. I mean, if I had to just say one thing, I would say it's the grace of God, the grace of the Guru, the grace of Ganga. But that's pretty amorphic and not necessarily so implementable. So, given that grace is there for everyone and that grace doesn't discriminate, and that grace is there for with all of you, let me see if I can put that into a way that's more specifically implementable. I think the core piece of it is really what we were talking about with suffering, which is a willingness to just be open to and with whatever the present moment is presenting. I spent a lot of the first 25 years of my life trying to not feel what I was feeling. And whether I was using food or alcohol or drugs or sex, there wasn't Facebook or anything like that at that time, but whatever numbing opportunities I had at hand, whether using any of those or just mentally checking out, I did whatever I could to not feel what I was feeling. And to use substances or relationships to not feel what the present moment was making me feel. Whether it was anger, whether it was sadness, whether it was pain, whatever it might have been. I didn't want to feel it. And so I turned to all of these different ways to not feel. And I think a major thing that has shifted is I'm no longer afraid of feeling anything. There's no longer anything that arises in me that any part of me feels like I don't want to feel that, and that I need to therefore push it away in some way. And so I think that enables me to therefore respond to each moment with the joy and the gratitude for that moment, even if it's not necessarily bringing me something that I would have chosen if I had a magic wand. But to be able to be present in that moment, knowing that whatever it is, it's all okay. And again, not that I would choose it. Not that there isn't pain or sadness or anger. There is. It's not that I've stopped having those experiences. It's just that they no longer scare me. They no longer are something that make me want to not feel them. And what I've noticed with emotions is when you're not afraid of them and you're not trying to numb them, they don't actually grab you nearly as hard. They actually tend to kind of flow like a wave that comes in and it peaks and it goes. And you'll notice this with the pain of loss. I mean, you're experiencing a very profound and very deep loss. And there's going to be pain, sadness, anguish, grief. But there's also going to be joy, because emotions are very fluid. And as a wave of pain or sadness arises, and then it dissipates, it shifts into, for example, a wave of joy. As you think about that person who you've lost that was a wave of anguish, as they are now in front of your eyes, suddenly you're full of joy because you see them and you feel them. And then maybe that joy shifts to anger. An anger that the mind says makes no sense, but nonetheless it's there. How dare you? How dare you keep smoking, eating junky food, not wearing your seatbelt? I mean, whatever it may have been that precipitated us losing them, there's anger. Or just anger at the universe. How dare you? And then that may lead itself into a moment of even just deep laughter as you sort of hear your own voice scolding this person you love of the same thing that you had scolded them for 40 or 50 years. And then there's again a moment. And they're like waves of the ocean, and they arise and they peak and they crash and they change and they arise but they don't drown you as long as you allow them to come. And I think that's one of the key secrets. And I think gratitude is another one. I find myself just infinitely grateful all the time. I find the universe so incredibly giving. And I find myself such an undeserving, and I don't mean that in any kind of personal belittling sort of way, but just in a really just honest, aware sort of way, just a very undeserving being of the grace and the blessings. And so I find myself just constantly in a state of awe and gratitude at the way that the universe just keeps showering blessings upon us through really no merit of our own. I mean, we're just here, and the universe just keeps giving us all of these blessings. And I think those two things are probably key to that smile. Yeah. And I'm so sorry about your husband. But I'm so glad that you were able to come here for those last rites. Yeah. You know, when we lose a loved one, it gives us really, along with the anguish and pain, such an incredible opportunity to connect with that being, soul to soul and energy to energy, rather than body to body. And that doesn't take away the loss of the physical body, but it reminds us that we've been given this opportunity to actually drop into the part of us that isn't our body in order to connect with the part of them that isn't their body. So our physical body can connect with their physical body. Our intellectual mind connects with their intellectual mind. We have a conversation or a debate or whatever it may be. Our emotional heart connects to their emotional heart. But our soul connects to their soul. And when they no longer have a body or a brain or that personal emotional heart, they still have soul. They still are soul. And so it sends us into the soul of ourselves to connect with them. And that's a very beautiful opportunity. Not that it takes away the pain of loss any, but it's a yes and rather than an either or. Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Wonderful. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your evening. A beautiful morning and day to our family joining us from all over the world. And I look so forward to being with you all tomorrow. Have a beautiful, beautiful night.